Assalamualaikum and good morning, everyone. Today, my group and I will be presenting our study, which focuses on indirect speech acts by comparing two YouTube videos. Indirect speech act Big Bang representing a Western culture, and Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu representing Indonesian or Asian culture. Our study is titled Indirect Speech Acts in English and Indonesian for language used in YouTube videos. So here, my group members' name, we have Muhammad Akil, Nur Amira, Nur Nasuha, Nuri Najla, and me, Yasmin Shahira. Next slide. All right, so here are our table of contents. The first one, we have Chapter 1, Introduction. Chapter 2, we have a literature review. Chapter 3, Methodology. Chapter 4, Findings. And lastly, Chapter 5, Discussion and Conclusion. Next slide. All right. For the introduction, our study looks at how indirect speech acts are used in English and Indonesian. We compare two YouTube videos, one Western and one Asian, to see how culture affects the way people speak indirectly. Our study is guided by Hall's and Hofstede's cultural theories. Next slide. So second, a bit of background. Language and culture are always connected. Different cultures communicate differently, especially when it comes to showing politeness or giving instructions. Based on Hall's high context and low context theory, Western cultures are usually more direct, while Indonesian culture is more indirect and polite. We also use Hofstede's cultural dimensions to understand how values like collectivism and hierarchy influence indirectness. Next slide. Next is our problem statement. Even though all cultures use directive speech acts, the level of indirectness is not the same. Most previous studies focus more on grammar, so our study tries to fill the gap by looking at how culture actually shapes indirect speech acts. Our study has two objectives. The first one is to compare the types and frequency of indirect speech acts in both videos, and the second one is to see how cultural values influence the way indirectness is expressed. And these objectives lead to our two research questions, which are basically the same as the objectives. Next slide. Now, for the significance. This study helps us understand communication across cultures. It can benefit students, teachers, translators, and anyone who interacts across different cultural backgrounds. It also shows how media reflects real-life communication behavior. All right, next slide. All right, so for the scope and limitations of the study, we only focus on indirect directive speech acts like requests, suggestions, and advice. We analyze only the spoken transcripts from the two videos. Our limitations include not analyzing tone, uh, gestures, or other types of speech acts. Next slide. Lastly, here are the key terms we use. We have speech acts, directive acts, indirect speech acts, high context versus low context communication, and Hofstede's cultural dimensions. These terms help guide our analysis and understanding. I think that's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Yasmin, for your explanation. So, for my part, I will explain about Chapter 2, the literature review. So, now take a look at the first slide, which is overview of indirect speech act. So, this overview said that, sorry, okay. So this overview shows that indirect speech act have a hidden meaning. So that indirect speech acts happen when someone say something, but the real intention is different from the literal words. People use uh, people use this sound to show polite, avoid being harsh, and or express meaning in a soft way. In both videos, indirectness appears often, but each culture use it differently. Next slide. Okay, now the whole high context versus low context theory. Okay, according to Austin and Searle, speech acts have three layers, which is the first one literal meaning, intended meaning, and the effect on the listener. This explains why one sentence can carry a multiple purpose. So indirect speech act helps reduce pressure or force in communication. It makes our responses sound lighter and less demanding. So in Big Bang, indirectness is used for sarcasm, while in the Indonesian video, it is used to show politeness and respect. These two functions depends on the situation and cultural expectation. The next one is applying Hall's theory to the two videos. Okay, in Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu, indirectness is used mainly for politeness, respect, and maintaining harmony. Characters avoid saying no directly and uses phrases, while in Big Bang Theory, indirectness appears through sarcasm, jokes, and playful criticism, reflecting a culture where being witty is acceptable and even expected in conversation. These contrasting uses show that the indirectness does not have the same meaning across culture. Okay, the next one is Hot Swedish cultural dimension. Okay, the culture influence politeness, communication, and indirectness. According to Hofstede, individualistic cultures like the US encourage direct speaking. Collect, uh, Collectivist cultures like Indonesian encourage politeness, harmony, and indirect speech. So these two cultural values explain why the two videos use indirectness differently. Okay, the next one is indirect speech act in both video. So each video uses indirectness for different purpose. In Big Bang, the indirectness is uses for humor, sarcasm, or personality. But in the Indonesian video, indirectness is used to show respect, politeness, and careful communication. This difference shows that two videos show cultural priorities that influence a language. Okay, next one is previous studies on indirect speech acts. So research shows that indirect speech act change depending on the culture. Studies show that indirects mean different things and different culture because in Indonesian settings, indirectness signals politeness, but in the Western setting, it often expresses humor or soft disagreement. So that means these findings support the patterns seen in our two videos that we compare. Okay, and the last one is summary of the literature review. So this one is indirect speech acts depend on a culture and communication style, which is indirect speech acts appears in all culture, but their purpose has changed. Western speakers use them for humor, while Indonesian speakers use them for politeness. So that means understanding this difference help explain how culture shapes our communication. So that's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter.
Okay. Thank you, Akil. My name is Nuruna Suha and I will be presenting Chapter 3, which explains the methodology we use in our study. So first off, let's see the research design. So we use qualitative descriptive design because our data is based on dialogue. So this approach helps us analyze indirect speech act and their cultural meaning. Next, looking at the data sources, our data comes from two YouTube videos. The first one is Indirect Speech Act Big Bang, which is in English language and also in Western culture. And another one is Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu in Indonesian language, which in the Indonesian culture. Okay, looking at the sample, we use purposive sampling, meaning we only selected lines that actually contain indirect speech act. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Looking at the data collection and data analysis. So, for data collection, we first watch both videos several times to fully understand the context. Then, we transcribe all dialogues into a Google document. So, after that, we went through the transcript and identified any lines that contain indirect speech act, hence the purposive sampling method. And then these lines were then organized into tables for clearer analysis. Right. So the data analysis. So from the counted frequencies of each type of indirect speech that we presented in the findings in the previous process, we used those data to answer the first research question. Then we compared the findings between the Western English context and the Indonesian Asian context. We interpreted the patterns using Hall's high and low context communication theory and Hofstede cultural dimension. So this is to answer the second research question. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's see the validity and ethics. So to ensure validity, we cross-check our transcription with the YouTube subtitles and replayed scenes to ensure accuracy. For reliability, we referred to well-established theoretical framework, Hall's context theory and Hofstede cultural dimension. Using these trusted theories, strengthen the credibility of IO interpretation. For the ethic one, our study does not involve human participant, only public YouTube videos. So we ensure that all ideas, theories, and quotation were properly cited to avoid plagiarism and to respect intellectual property. And using public videos remove concern related to consent or privacy. So that is all for chapter 3. Let's move on to the next chapter.
Now we are moving on to the findings. So in the findings here we have the types and frequency of indirect speech between both videos and the comparison of indirect speech between Big Bang and Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu. So first of all, Big Bang theory uses 4 types of different indirect speech acts, which is requests, complaints, skepticism, and sarcasm. So the most frequent use of indirect speech act is request and sarcasm. Hence, for the Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu YouTube videos, it has 6 different types of indirect speech acts, which is request, indirect refusal, acceptance or refusal, indirect confirmation, indirectly sharing memory, and indirect suggestion. So in Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu, the frequent use of indirect speech is indirectly sharing memory and indirect suggestions. Here we can see the similar use of indirect speech is request among both of the videos. However, for Big Bang theory, it uses more of a sarcasm and request rather than indirectly of indirect speech between Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu. So next slide. This is because for Big Bang YouTube video, it is a humorous, ironic, and confrontational genre which is different with Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu, which is more harmony, it has mutual understanding and more politeness to it. This is also according to Blom-Kulka, 1987, which indirectness serves different functions across cultures. It's a strategy for politeness and maintaining social cohesion in some cultures, and a vehicle for humor and subtlety in others. So that's all for findings.
Alright, now let's move on to the last chapter, which is chapter 5. So the first in this slide, I will be talking about the research question 1, research question 2, the implications, recommendation, and also lastly the conclusion. Okay, so on this slide, I'm presenting the findings for research question 1 about the types and the frequency of indirect speech acts. So for the English video, which is the Big Bang Theory, there are 4 main types, which is requests, complaints, sarcasm, and skepticism. So the most common types are requests and sarcasm. So these are mainly used for humor, criticism, and also entertainment. So these reflects Western low context communication. People are more direct, but they can still be playful or sarcastic even when they are being indirect in their speech. While on the other hand, the Indonesian video, Kita Usahakan Rumah Itu, it has 6 types of indirect speech acts, including indirect requests, refusals, suggestions, recommendations, confirmations, sharing memories, and acceptance or refusal. So the most frequent are indirect suggestions and sharing memories. So here, indirectness is used to maintain politeness, strengthen relationships, and avoid the conflict. So this matches high context Asian communication where being indirect shows respect and keeps the harmony. So while both video use indirect speech acts, the purpose and style are very, very different. Next slide. Okay, so this slide focuses on research question 2, which is how cultural values influence indirect speech acts. So in the English video, we see low context communication, messages are clear and direct, and sarcasm is obvious. According to Hofstede, the culture is individualistic and has low power distance, which means people can speak freely and even joke without worrying about the hierarchy. So in contrast with the Indonesian video, it shows high context communication. So the meaning depends on tone, situation, and shared understanding. So Hofstede shows a collectivistic culture with high power distance, where people communicate politely and indirectly to maintain the harmony. They also have higher uncertainty avoidance, which makes them more careful in how they express their thoughts and also the ideas. Overall, culture shapes not only how people speak indirectly, but also why and when they do it. So the English video uses indirectness for humor, while Indonesian video uses it for politeness. Next slide. So this slide summarizes the implications, recommendations, and for the next slide, I'll be talking about the conclusion of the research study. Okay, so the first one, which is the implication of the study, understanding how different cultures use indirect speech acts can prevent miscommunication, especially in multicultural settings. It also helps language teachers improve students' pragmatic awareness, teaching both language and cultural meaning. Plus, it shows that digital media like YouTube influences how people communicate today. And next is for the recommendation for future research. Future studies could explore other cultures such as African, Middle Eastern, or Latin American media. So researchers should also consider non-verbal communication like gesture, tone, and study how globalization affects the use of indirectness. It would also be useful to investigate different social groups like adolescents or people in corporate settings to see how age and hierarchy influence the use of indirect in communication. And finally, the conclusion. So both videos use indirect speech acts, but for different purposes, completely different purposes. So in the English video, it is mainly for humor and critique. So in the Indonesian video, it's for politeness and social harmony. So this fits with Hall's high end versus low context theory and Hofstede's cultural dimensions. So overall, indirectness is universal, but culture strongly affects how and why it used. So that's all from us. Thank you for listening and have a good day.